8 minutes past 9 on a Thursday in October. The front lobby of Halloran Tower on Meeting Street, Charleston. Vivienne Ashford stepped out of the black car. Behind her came 6 people from the State Pension Fund and the Charleston Economic Council, and a reporter with a camera. She saw the man near the revolving door. Blue flannel, leather satchel, a long drawing tube on his shoulder. She glanced at the tube and the dusty work boots and spoke without raising her voice. "The help uses the back door." She pointed to the corner of the building. The man nodded once and walked the way she had pointed. The reporter lowered his camera, 1 beat behind. 2 hours earlier, across the Cooper River, the kitchen of a narrow house in Mount Pleasant smelled like batter and coffee. Bennett Caldwell stood at the stove in a gray t-shirt with the blue flannel folded over a chair behind him. He turned a pancake with a wooden spatula. The morning sun came through the window over the sink and laid a square of warm light across the kitchen table. His daughter Caroline sat at the table in small wire-rimmed glasses, building a Lego tower 1 block at a time. She was 8 years old, and she built the way her mother used to read recipes, slow, careful, with her tongue tucked into the corner of her mouth. "Dad," she said, without looking up, "how many columns does a building this tall need on the bottom before it falls down?" Bennett looked over his shoulder and counted the blocks on her top tier. "Depends what you put on top, Care. Count what you stacked and we'll work it out." She bent her head and counted under her breath. He slid a pancake onto her plate and set cut strawberries beside it. On the wall above the table hung a framed photograph. Bennett, much younger, hair a little longer. A woman beside him with the same brown eyes Caroline had inherited. A 4-year-old Caroline on her father's hip, mouth open in a delighted laugh. Behind them rose a glass and steel tower in late afternoon sun. The day they opened Halloran Tower, 2015, Ellen Caldwell had been the one who told him to take the project. "You're ready," she had said. "Stop pretending you aren't." 3 years and 7 months without her now. Bennett had learned to count mornings. Every breakfast was a small arithmetic. Every question Caroline asked him was one Helen would have answered better. 12, Caroline said. "I need 12. Sounds about right." At 7:35 he drove her to Sullivan's Island Elementary in his old white pickup. The marsh grass along the causeway was turning gold. Caroline talked the whole way about a class trip the following week. "We're going to a building downtown. The tall one with the fish in the lobby." Bennett kept his eyes on the road. "That'll be fun. You know that building, Dad?" A small pause. "I've heard of it." He pulled up at the school gate, adjusted her backpack strap, and reminded her to eat her sandwich. She hugged him hard and ran inside. At 8:15 he opened the front door of Caldwell Print and Plot on Coleman Boulevard. The shop was small and clean, one big plotter against the back wall, racks of cardboard tubes, the dry, papery smell of fresh blueprints. Marcus, his one full-time employee, was sealing a delivery tube with tape. "Hey, boss, the Halloran order's done. They called this morning, wanted it rushed. Signing event at 10. Mr. Holcomb himself asked us to walk it straight up to floor 12, not through receiving." Bennett went still at the word Halloran. He had not set foot in that building since 2019. "I'll take it. You don't have to. I can run it before class. I've got something out that way." Marcus shrugged and slid the tube across the counter. Bennett slung his satchel over his shoulder, walked out, and pointed the truck toward the Ravenel Bridge. At the same hour, 28 floors above Meeting Street, Vivienne Ashford stood at the long mirror in her office and checked the line of her jacket for the 3rd time. Camel-colored wool, hair in a low knot, no jewelry except the thin Cartier watch on her wrist. She had laid the outfit out the night before, the way she had been doing every night for 5 months. Her assistant, Devon, knocked once. "Miss Ashford." Mr. Halloran arrived on 32 at 7:45. "He's asked not to be disturbed until 10. She turned from the mirror. "When was his last visit to this tower?" 5 months ago. "The day you started." She nodded. She did not need Devon to say the rest. Theodore Halloran did not appear at branch offices for the view. He was watching her. For a half-second she thought of the final interview. 6 months ago, the long oak table on the 32nd floor in Atlanta, one of the directors had leaned forward and asked her what she believed the greatest weakness of a young CEO was. She had answered without hesitating. "Perceived authority. People see your age before they see your work." The director had not smiled. He had only written something down. Garrett Holcomb was in her doorway now. 49, silver at the temples, tablet in hand. 3 things before the delegation arrives. The pension fund team moved their arrival up to 9. James Riley from the Post and courier confirmed, and we've got a couple of technical deliveries this morning, drawings for the signing display. I told the print shop to come straight up to 12. Vivienne frowned slightly. Straight up? Why not through receiving? It's a rush. I thought you'd want it in front of the delegation on time. She nodded and let it go. She did not ask which print shop. She had no reason to. She lifted her coat from the back of the chair and remembered, for no reason, the conversation Garrett had walked her through her first week in this office. He had crossed one leg over the other and said gently, "The lobby is the face. A delegation never sees work clothes near the revolving door. I've held that line for 8 years. If you want the board to trust you, hold it harder than I do." She had taken every piece of advice he had ever offered. At 8:55, she rode the executive elevator down to the ground floor. The delegation's black cars were already turning the corner at the end of the block. She stepped out through the revolving door into the bright October light and lifted her chin to meet them. 32 floors above her, Theodore Halloran stood at the window of his private office with a coffee cup in his hand. He watched the delegation step out of their cars. He watched Vivienne walk forward to greet them, and then his eye caught movement across the street. An old white pickup at the curb. A man stepping down from the driver's side in a blue flannel and work boots, sliding a long drawing tube out of the cab and onto his shoulder. Theodore Halloran set his coffee cup down on the sill, very carefully, and did not look away. 9:08. The help uses the back door. Bennett nodded once and walked the way she had pointed. He did not look back at her. He did not look at the delegation. He walked along the curved limestone facade of the tower with the drawing tube on his shoulder and his free hand in his pocket, and his face did not change. He had designed the loading entrance on the east side himself, 140 feet from the front door, around the corner, past the planter he had specified to break the wind off the harbor. At the east service door, Margot Whitfield was on the morning floor with a clipboard. She was 58, 22 years in this building, and she had been the one who handed Bennett his commemorative key at the opening ceremony. She looked up. She saw him. The clipboard tilted in her hand. "Mr. Caldwell." The radio on her belt crackled. Garrett Holcomb's voice. "Margot, handle the print delivery quickly. Don't let it slow down the front." Margot's mouth tightened. She set the clipboard on the desk and walked over with her hand out for the tube. "Mr. Caldwell, I am so sorry. I didn't know you were coming this morning." "It's all right, Margot. Good to see you." She logged him in. He stepped into the service elevator with 2 custodians in gray coveralls. The cab smelled of industrial soap. At 14, the cab paused, and through the slit between the doors he could see the high ceiling of the gallery floor he had specified at 4.2 meters to hold a chandelier no one had ever installed. On 12, he handed the tube to a young woman in a headset who did not look at his face. He took the service elevator back down and started for the loading exit. At 9:24, 3 floors above him, Vivienne Ashford was walking the delegation back to the main lobby for the photographs. Marston was beside her. Eleanor Pierce was a step behind, watching everything. James Riley had the camera raised. The executive elevator chimed. The doors opened. Theodore Halloran stepped out, 73 years old. Gray suit, white hair combed back. The delegation turned as one. Marston's mouth opened slightly. Eleanor Pierce inclined her head a fraction of an inch. Vivienne went forward at once, professional smile in place. "Mr. Halloran, we're honored to—" He lifted one hand, not unkindly, a small flat gesture that meant wait. He walked past her. He walked past the entire delegation. He walked across the marble floor of the lobby toward the east corridor, and Bennett Caldwell came out of it at the same moment with his satchel on his shoulder. Theodore Halloran stopped in front of him and put out his hand. "Bennett, forgive me for letting you walk into your own building through the back." The lobby went silent. The fountain ran. James Riley lifted his camera and the shutter clicked twice. Bennett took the older man's hand. He did not smile. He inclined his head. "Theodore." Halloran turned. He took Bennett by the elbow and walked him back toward the delegation, his voice pitched low and clear to carry. "Members of the council. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Bennett Caldwell, lead architect of this building, recipient of the AIA South Carolina Award in 2015, the man whose name is on the cornerstone you walked past coming in." Eleanor Pierce was the first to move. She stepped out of the delegation line and offered her hand. "Mr. Caldwell, it is a very great pleasure." Theo Marston was second, then the 2 associates, then the deputy chair. James Riley took 3 photographs in quick succession, and lowered the camera with a strange, careful expression on his face. Vivienne stood where she was. The blood had gone out of her cheeks. She could feel the marble cold through the soles of her shoes. At the far end of the lobby, by the security desk, Garrett Holcomb had stopped walking. He took one half step back into the shadow of the column behind him, and then he turned around and walked briskly toward the stairs. Theodore Halloran was already inviting the delegation upstairs for coffee. He extended the invitation to Bennett with a small nod. Bennett declined, polite. "I have to pick up my daughter at 3. You'll come back another day." "I will." Bennett walked out through the revolving door at the front of the building. Vivienne did not watch him go. She turned, professionally, and gestured the delegation toward the elevator bank. Eleanor Pierce fell in beside her. In the elevator going up to 32, Eleanor watched the floor numbers climb. "Miss Ashford, I think you and I should have a private conversation later this week." "Yes," Vivienne said. "I think we should." She got the delegation to coffee. She sat at the head of the table on 32 and made the introductions she had rehearsed for 2 weeks. Theodore Halloran said nothing about the lobby. He poured cream into his cup and asked Marston intelligent questions about pension allocation. He did not look at her once. At 12:30 she returned to her office and closed the door and stood at her window for a long time. Then she sat down at her computer and typed the name Bennett Caldwell into the corporate archive. 23 results. Caldwell Studio Architecture. Founding Principal. Lead Architect on the Halloran Tower Commission, 2012 through 2014. AIA South Carolina Award, 2015. A photograph of a man in a black jacket at a podium. A younger woman beside him in a green dress. A small girl in the woman's arms. The obituary came up at the bottom of the page. Helen Margaret Caldwell, survived by her husband Bennett and her daughter Caroline. March 2022. The studio had closed 3 months later. Vivienne sat very still. At 2 she drove herself across the Ravenel Bridge to Mount Pleasant. She found Caldwell print and plot on Coleman Boulevard. The door was locked. A young man in a hoodie waved her off through the glass. She stood on the sidewalk in her camel coat in the October sun and felt foolish. She took a business card from her wallet, crossed out her title with one clean line of pen, and wrote underneath in her own hand, "Bennett, I owe you an apology that doesn't come through an assistant." She slid it under the door. That evening at 6:15, Garrett Holcomb was on the phone in his car in the parking garage with a board member named Lloyd Pickering. "Lloyd, we need to talk about this morning." She insulted Theodore's personal architect in front of the state pension fund. "There's a photograph in the paper tomorrow. I'm not raising the issue, I'm just saying the optics." Lloyd Pickering said something that took a long time to say. Garrett listened. He smiled at the steering wheel. "Of course. Just wanted you to have the picture." At the same hour, Bennett opened his front door and let Caroline run past him into the kitchen for a snack. He put the mail on the counter without looking at it. "Dad, did you go in the building with the fish today?" He kept his face still. "I did. For a minute." "What's inside?" He thought about the marble, the fountain, the 73-year-old man with his hand out. "It's a nice building," he said. "I think you'll like it next week." Saturday morning was bright and cold. Vivienne had not planned on going anywhere. She had slept badly for 2 nights running, and lay awake thinking about the marble floor and the 73-year-old man and the line on the floor where her career had quietly opened up beneath her. At 9, she put on jeans for the first time in 5 months and walked 3 blocks down to Buxton Books on King Street for a hardcover she had been putting off since August. The bell over the door rang. The shop smelled of paper and old wood, and somebody's pour-over coffee from the back office. The children's section was at the back, past the staircase. She did not intend to go there. She was looking for the new releases. She heard the laugh first, a small, clear, bright laugh, and a deeper one underneath, low and amused. She had heard one of those laughs before, faintly, in the corner of a board photograph from 2015, and she had never expected to hear it again outside of an archive. She stopped at the end of the picture book aisle. Bennett was sitting cross-legged on the floor in jeans and a navy sweater with his sleeves pushed up to his elbows. Caroline was beside him with a book open in her lap, reading aloud, stumbling cheerfully over the word architecture. Bennett corrected her gently, the way a father corrects a child who is going to grow up loving the corrected word. Caroline tried it again and made him laugh. Caroline looked up first. She looked at Vivienne with no recognition and a great deal of curiosity. She closed the book carefully, the way she did everything, and stood up and came over. "Do you like this one?" It's about buildings. There's a girl in it who builds a whole city out of cardboard, and then a real city builds a real one because of her. Vivienne crouched down to her height. The hem of her coat pooled on the floor. I haven't read this one. You should. It's really good. My dad reads it to me sometimes. Caroline turned to her father. Dad, this lady might like the building book. Bennett had gotten to his feet by then. He stood at the end of the aisle with one hand in the pocket of his jeans and the other still holding the book Caroline had been reading. His hair was wet at the temples like he had just come from a shower. His face was neither cold nor warm. Good morning. Good morning. They looked at each other over Caroline's head for a long second. Caroline missed the look entirely. She was already pulling another book from a low shelf. Vivienne straightened. Her voice came out lower than she meant it to. I didn't know who you were on Thursday. That isn't an excuse. No, Bennett said. It isn't. Caroline glanced up at the new tone in their voices. Do you know my dad? I met him this week, Vivienne said carefully. At his work, Caroline considered this. He doesn't really work. He prints things. Bennett's mouth moved, very faintly, at one corner. That's right, Care. Vivienne paid for the book Caroline had recommended. At the counter she found, on the title page, a small initial penciled neatly in the bottom corner. C.C. Caroline had been marking the books she liked at this store, evidently, for some time. The girl at the register saw the mark and smiled at Vivienne without commenting, and slid the book into a brown paper bag. Outside the bookstore she sat down on the iron bench in the October sun, and held the book on her knees, and did not open it for a long time. King Street moved past her in its Saturday way. A horse carriage clopped by with tourists in it. A young couple walked a small dog. None of them looked at her. On Monday morning, Theodore Halloran flew Bennett down to Charleston on the company plane and offered him the consulting role on the Riverfront Warehouse rehabilitation in the conference room on the 32nd floor. Bennett shook his head before Theodore had finished. I don't sign drawings anymore. You know that. I'm not asking for your signature. I'm asking for your eyes. Bennett was quiet for a long time. Through the window, the Cooper River was the color of pewter under a low autumn sky. Part-time, he said finally. I pick Caroline up at 3 every day. That isn't negotiable. 3 o'clock pickup. Written into the contract. The project would be co-administered by Halloran Properties Southeast. Vivienne Ashford was the operational lead. Bennett would work out of a small office on the 29th floor 4 mornings a week. He started Tuesday. For a week they worked side by side and barely spoke. She brought him drawings. He marked them with a soft pencil. She watched the way he read a floor plan, the way another man might read a face. He could tell her, in 2 sentences, why a corridor would feel oppressive at 6 in the evening even though it was beautiful at noon. On Thursday evening they worked late. At 9 she ordered Chinese food up to the small conference room and put 2 cardboard containers on the table between them. The floor had gone quiet 2 hours earlier. Only the cleaning crew moved at the far end of the corridor, the soft hum of a vacuum somewhere on the other side of the building. She asked, quietly, about Helen. He set his chopsticks down. He took a moment before he answered. She was sick for 10 months. I wasn't with her as much as I should have been. I was running a project up in North Charleston. I told myself I'd finish it by Christmas, and then I'd be home for whatever came next. Christmas came. I wasn't home enough. I'm sorry. It's an old grief now. It has its place. She did not press. She picked at her food and watched him for a moment without meaning to. The desk lamp behind him caught the gray at his temples. She told him after a long silence about her mother, a hotel manager in Savannah, a guest who had once handed her mother a tip and told her to clean room 412 more carefully next time. My mother kept the tip. She said money was money. I was 13. I watched her smile at that man and put the bill in her apron, and I swore I would never be the person standing on the other side of that exchange. Vivienne looked at her hands, and on Thursday morning I was. Bennett looked at her across the table for a long moment. Sometimes we are so afraid of becoming the thing we hate that we become it. She did not answer. She picked up her chopsticks and looked down at the table. Down the hallway, Garrett Holcomb was passing the conference room with a folder in his hand. He stopped. He looked through the narrow vertical window beside the door. He took out his phone and held it up to the glass. The flash did not fire. The shutter made no sound. He walked on. Margot Whitfield, coming out of the supply room across the corridor with a stack of fresh letterhead, saw him at the window. She saw him lift the phone. She saw him lower it and walk away. She stood in the corridor with the letterhead in her arms and her mouth set in a thin line. She had served 22 years in this tower. She had 3 months left on her contract before the next renewal. She walked back to the supply room and put the letterhead down and took out her own phone and began methodically to write down dates. The board hearing was set for the following Thursday at 10 in the morning in the executive conference room on 32. Garrett Holcomb had filed a formal cultural leadership concern with the parent board in Atlanta. 2 photographs taken through the glass of the small conference room door, time-stamped, captioned as inappropriate executive proximity. An attached memorandum noting that the CEO of Halloran Properties Southeast had publicly humiliated the personal consultant of the parent chairman before the state pension fund, and now appeared to be conducting a private relationship with the same man. Vivienne read the memorandum at 6 in the morning at her kitchen counter with a cup of black coffee. She read it twice. She set it down and washed her cup and dressed in the navy suit she wore when she expected difficulty. Bennett received a brief email from Theodore at 8, summoning him to the same room at the same hour. The email gave no reason. He drove across the bridge with his hands light on the wheel. They met in the corridor outside the conference room at 9:55. Vivienne lifted her eyes to his for 1 second and looked away. Bennett held the door for her. Inside, the long oak table was already lined with directors. Lloyd Pickering sat at one end with his hands folded. Garrett Holcomb sat at the other in a charcoal suit with the smallest careful smile. The chair of the board read the charges aloud in a flat voice. Public humiliation of a senior parent consultant. Conduct unbecoming the chief executive role. Suggestion of a personal entanglement compromising operational neutrality. Vivienne raised her hand for permission to speak. She accepted full responsibility for her conduct in the lobby. She rejected, on the record, the second charge. The chair nodded and turned to Bennett. There was a knock at the door. Margot Whitfield opened it without waiting for permission. She walked into the room in her gray reception jacket with a thin manila folder under her arm. She did not look at Garrett. My apologies for interrupting, sir. There is a matter the board needs before the testimony goes any further. She laid the folder on the table. On Thursday morning, the 2nd of October at 8:51, Mr. Holcomb instructed me by radio to direct Mr. Caldwell to the east loading entrance, knowing that Mr. Caldwell was the architect of this building. I have the radio log. On Thursday evening the 9th at 9:18, Mr. Holcomb photographed Miss Ashford and Mr. Caldwell through the conference room door without their knowledge. I witnessed it. On Friday morning the 10th, Mr. Holcomb emailed a freelance reporter named Caleb Vance, offering exclusive details on a developing scandal at this company. The forwarded email is in the folder. On Sunday the 12th, Mr. Holcomb placed 3 calls to Director Pickering's private line, totaling 37 minutes. She paused. I have kept silent because my contract is up for renewal in 3 months and Mr. Holcomb is the officer who signs it. I have worked in the building Mr. Caldwell designed for 22 years. I am not going to watch it be used to bring down another good person. Garrett Holcomb stood up. This is absurd. This woman is a receptionist. The door at the back of the room opened. Theodore Halloran walked in. He did not speak immediately. He walked to the head of the table and stood behind the chairman's chair and looked down the length of the table at Garrett. Sit down, Garrett. Garrett sat. Theodore turned to the board. I have been quietly auditing Mr. Holcomb's communications for 14 months. Miss Whitfield's evidence corroborates what my office already has. Mr. Holcomb is suspended without pay effective immediately, pending criminal referral for tortious interference. He turned to Vivienne. His face did not soften. Miss Ashford, I appointed you because I believed you came from a place you would not forget. You forgot. I trust the last 2 weeks have reminded you why I chose you. Vivienne held his gaze. Her voice was steady. I won't forget again. See that you don't. He looked at Bennett. The corner of his mouth moved. My apologies, Bennett. For the second time, accepted Theodore. For the second time, the board adjourned. Garrett was escorted out by building security through the front lobby in full view of the morning staff. Margot Whitfield watched him go from her post with no expression on her face. That evening, Vivienne left the building at 7. She walked through the front lobby for the first time in 5 months, at the pace of a person no longer in a hurry. She looked at the ceiling height. She looked at the proportion of the columns. She looked at the soft amber light Bennett had specified for the evening hours and understood, for the first time, that he had designed this room to forgive people for being tired. Margot Whitfield was still at the reception desk. Vivienne stopped in front of her. She had not planned what to say. "Thank you, Margot." Margot looked up. She did not smile. She inclined her head, the way she had inclined it 22 years ago to a young architect on his first walkthrough, and then she went back to her log. Bennett was outside on the sidewalk waiting for a car. He had not planned to walk out at the same time. He was simply there, hands in his jacket pockets, looking up Meeting Street at nothing in particular. "Can I drive you home?" He looked at her. He nodded. She drove him across the Ravenel Bridge with the windows half down. The air off the harbor was cold and clean. The lights of downtown fell away behind them. The bridge cables flashed orange under the sodium lamps in long, even pulses. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The radio was off. The dashboard glowed a dim green. "Caroline asked me a question last night," Bennett said. "What did she ask?" "She asked if you were the lady in the book she gave you." Vivienne kept her eyes on the road. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know. I don't make my daughter promises I can't keep." Vivienne nodded, slowly. The bridge unrolled itself ahead of them in two long curves of light. She thought of Caroline at the bookstore, of the small initial inside the cover, of the careful way the girl had handed her a book she loved, as if testing whether Vivienne could be trusted with it. "That's the right answer," she said. He did not respond. She turned off the bridge and onto the Mount Pleasant exit. The streets were dark and tree-lined and smelled of low tide. She pulled up at the curb in front of his narrow house. The porch light was on. Inside, a small lamp burned in the front room. Before he opened the door, he turned to her. "You know why I didn't argue with you on Thursday?" "Why?" "Because I designed that door. I knew exactly where it went. I trusted the building to speak for me." She turned to look at him properly for the first time since she had picked him up. The dashboard light caught the line of his jaw, and the gray at his temples she had not noticed before. "And if it hadn't?" He thought about it. "Then I would have walked out the back and gone home to my daughter," he said. "I stopped expecting buildings to defend me a long time ago. Thursday was a gift, Vivienne. I don't know whose." He stepped out and closed the door behind him gently. She sat with her hands on the wheel and watched him walk up the path. The front door opened. A small head in pajamas appeared at his hip. He bent and picked Caroline up in one easy motion and carried her inside. The downstairs lamp went out. A moment later, a smaller light went on upstairs. Caroline's bedroom. She had woken up. Vivienne could see, faintly through the curtain, the shape of Bennett sitting down on the edge of the bed. She sat at the curb for almost 5 minutes before she shifted into drive and pulled away. She drove all the way back across the bridge with the windows still down and did not turn the radio on once. 6 weeks later, on the first Saturday of December, the Riverfront Warehouse Phase 1 opened with a small ceremony. The morning was cool, and the harbor light was silver. The old brick warehouse had been opened up into a community center with a soaring central hall and tall windows facing the Cooper River. The original cast-iron columns ran in 2 long rows down the length of the space, repainted a soft black and left exposed. Bennett had spent 6 weeks redesigning the circulation around them. He had not signed the drawings. He had only marked them in soft pencil, page after page, and handed them back to the staff architect at Halloran Properties, whose name would go on the title block. Vivienne stood at the front entrance in a long charcoal coat at 9:45. She had asked Bennett and Caroline to come as her guests. Theodore Halloran was already inside reviewing the program with the staff. A small crowd of donors and community members was beginning to gather under the cast-iron portico. The white pickup pulled up at 5 of 10. Caroline got out first in a small navy dress and white tights, and her sketchbook clutched against her chest. She ran straight at Vivienne and wrapped both arms around her legs. Vivienne crouched down to her. "Hi, Care." "Hi. Dad says this is the building you and him made. Your dad made most of it. I just kept the lights on." Caroline considered this. "That's important too." Bennett came up behind his daughter. He was in a clean dark flannel and a gray jacket. He had shaved. He looked at the brick facade of the warehouse the way a man looks at a face he has not seen in some time. Vivienne stood. She held out her hand. He looked at it. He hesitated for one beat, not unkindly, not at all, and then he took it. Caroline took his other hand without being asked. The 3 of them walked through the front doors of the warehouse together. Theodore Halloran spoke briefly inside. He stood at the podium under the central skylight and acknowledged the donors, and then he acknowledged Bennett by name. He said the project would not have been possible without him. He said it without flourish, the way he said everything, and the room applauded. Vivienne spoke last. She had a single page of notes in her hand and did not look at it. "I have learned in the last 2 months," she said, "that the way we greet someone at the door decides the way we run everything behind it. This building was built to welcome people. I would like to do the same." She did not look at Bennett. The room applauded politely. Afterward, there were small plates of food set out on a long table by the window. Caroline took one of everything. Bennett walked the length of the hall slowly with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking up at his own old columns, touching one of them once with his palm and then moving on. He stopped at the far window where the water came up close to the brick and stood there for some time without speaking. Vivienne let him have the moment. She had begun to understand that some of his pauses were not silences, but small private returns to rooms she had not been invited into. Caroline followed him over after a while and stood beside him at the window. He bent down and pointed at one of the cast-iron columns and told her something quietly. She nodded, very serious. She lifted her sketchbook against her chest and looked up at the column too, the way her father was looking at it, with the same slight tilt of the head. Caroline tugged her father's hand. "Dad, can Miss Vivienne come get coffee with us after?" Bennett looked over at her. She nodded, very small. Sable and Crumb on Church Street smelled like butter and cinnamon and burned sugar. The bell over the door rang when they came in. The three of them took the table by the front window, the small round one with the wrought iron base and the chipped marble top. Caroline opened her sketchbook and went to work with the focused intensity of an artist on commission. She lined up her 2 favorite pencils beside the page and frowned slightly at the blank paper the way her father frowned at a blank plan. Bennett ordered coffee for himself and Vivienne and hot cocoa for Caroline. The waitress, a young woman with her hair in a long braid, smiled at Caroline and asked her what she was drawing. Caroline said she didn't know yet. The waitress said that was the best way to start. They spoke quietly about the second phase of the project. Bennett would consult again, on the same terms. Part-time. 3 o'clock pickup. Vivienne would administer from the Halloran side. The conversation was practical. Neither of them was practical about anything else in their lives at that moment, and they both knew it. And the practical talk was a small kindness they were extending to one another. There was a long quiet between them. Caroline drew. The window framed a stretch of Church Street in late autumn light. A man walked past with a dog. A woman in a red coat looked in at the pastries and kept walking. "What are you drawing, Care?" Bennett asked. She held up one finger. Almost done. She finished her line, turned the sketchbook around, and slid it across the table to her father. Then she turned it 90 degrees so Vivienne could see. 3 figures in front of a long, low building beside a river. A man in flannel, a small girl in a dress, a woman with brown hair holding the small girl's hand, 2 birds in the sky, a tree. Vivienne looked at the drawing. She did not say anything for a long moment. Bennett looked at it. He looked at his daughter, who was already turning the page and drawing a small cat in the corner of the next sheet, and not paying attention to either of them. He spoke, low, just for Vivienne. "You don't have to walk through any more doors. You're already here." Vivienne put her hand down on the table between the 2 cups of coffee. She did it slowly, palm down, the way a person sets something fragile. Bennett laid his hand over hers. Not all the way. Just at the knuckles, lightly, as if asking a question. She did not move her hand. Caroline drew her cat. She gave it whiskers and a long curling tail and a tiny crown, and she did not look up. The window held the 3 of them in soft amber light, and behind them the bakery rolled its quiet Saturday morning forward, and outside Charleston was bright and clear and cold. Neither of them had been looking. But somewhere between a back door and a front door, both of them had stopped pretending they didn't want to be found.